Mr. Spiegelman is not available. So as Vice Chair, this duty has fallen to me. I'd like to start the meeting. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather virtually and in person is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. Welcome to meeting number 3, the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Pursuant to the motion adopted on January 31st, the committee is meeting on the situation at the Russia-Ukraine border and the implications for peace and security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will also show the person speaking rather than the entire meeting. Shots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. 1, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. 2, for members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. 3, before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. I would like now to welcome our witnesses. Now, is Ms. Hulan on now, or?
I am indeed on.
Oh, okay. So, Ms. Hulan, I'm Marty Morantz, a member of Parliament for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingland, Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm chairing today as the chair is not available, and I'd like to welcome you to begin your remarks. You will have 5 minutes. Please feel free to proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I hope that my camera is working properly. I've had some technical issues, and I do apologize for my delayed joining of the meeting. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the members of the committee. The
mobilization of Russian military forces in Ukraine and nearby continues without any sign of de-escalating. The situation remains unpredictable, and the military intentions for President Putin remain nebulous. We continue to work closely with our allies and partners to find a diplomatic alternative to military conflict by developing multiple measures of dissuasion. Today I'm going to talk to you about the 4 main lines of action that Global Affairs Canada is focusing on. We're working on sanctions, supporting Ukraine, and planning, consular planning.
Engagement. Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, over the last month, Canada and our Euro-Atlantic allies have engaged in intense diplomacy along several complementary tracks, primarily via NATO, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and bilaterally, of course, between the United States and Russia. Minister Joly also recently traveled to Ukraine, Belgium, and France and is in frequent contact with her counterparts. Canada and its allies are united in this crisis. We speak with one voice in support of Ukraine and see diplomacy as the only viable path forward for Russia. We have presented Russia with a choice: meaningful dialogue or severe consequences.
As regards the consequences, Canada is collaborating with Australia, Europe, and its member states, the United Kingdom and the United States, to put together punitive measures, including sanctions. Canada is ready to quickly impose heavy sanctions that would target the individuals and entities that are influential and have connections with key sectors of the Russian economy. We will also, with little notice, we will also be able to broaden these sanctions to other individuals and entities that form part of the essential sectors of the Russian economy. In addition, we will be able to quickly implement other financial measures, including export prohibitions in specific sectors. For the moment, we do not exclude any possibilities.
For Ukraine. Since January 2014, Canada has committed more than $890 million in multifaceted assistance to Ukraine. Now we are further bolstering that support. On January 26th, in addition to the renewal of Operation Unifier, which my colleague from the Department of National Defence will address, the Prime Minister announced that Canada is providing a further $50 million in assistance to Ukraine. This includes $35 million in development assistance and $15 million in humanitarian assistance. This new funding complements the work of Canada's Peace and Stabilization Operations Program in Ukraine on security sector reform, countering disinformation, supporting the Minsk process, and advancing the women, peace, and security agenda. Russia's threat has destabilized Ukraine's economy, which is why Canada also offered a loan of up to $120 million to Ukraine last month. Through Canada's assistance, we are also supporting Ukraine's efforts to reform and build accountable, effective, and resilient democratic institutions. In the long run, such reforms are the most effective way to strengthen Ukraine's democracy, enhance prosperity for the people of Ukraine, and build Ukraine's resilience to Russian aggression.
1 minute.
Du côté consulaire, bien que...
On the consular side, although the security situation is stable, the risks of armed conflict in the Ukraine have increased on account of Russia's actions. As a result, we have modified our advice and notice to travelers. We recommend to Canadians to avoid any travel to the Ukraine and to leave the country before it becomes impossible to take a commercial flight. The Canadian Embassy has also authorized the departure of non-essential staff and their families. 90% of Canadians in Ukraine have dual citizenship with Ukraine and Canada, and some 800 Canadians have registered their presence in Ukraine with our embassy. For the time being, few consular requests have been received.
Although the situation in Ukraine and on its border is fluid, Canada's support for Ukraine is steadfast. Russia's actions strike at the very core of the values and principles that underpin the rules-based international order. In that sense, Ukraine's security is not just Europe's security, it is the world's security, including ours here at home in Canada.
I just have to say 5 minutes is up to you. Can you wrap up?
Yeah, Canada will continue to work hand in hand with our allies and partners towards a peaceful solution. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And on to our next witness. We have with us from the Department of National Defense, Major General Paul Prevost, Director of Staff, Strategic Joint Staff. Major General, you have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So good afternoon. Mr. Chair, I understand my microphone is not the best, so please interrupt me if at any time if you lose me. Alors, comme vous avez mentionné,
as you mentioned, I'm Major General Paul Prevost. I'm with the Defense, and I'm happy to be with you today. I'm Director of Staff, Strategic Joint Staff, and
the evolving tensions between Ukraine and Russia. I'll be providing you with a brief update on Operation Unifier, the Canadian Armed Forces training mission in Ukraine. Let me start by speaking broadly about Operational Unifier, as last week's announcement is an extension and an expansion of this mission. Since 2015, the Canadian Armed Forces have had roughly 200 personnel deployed to Ukraine on a 6-month rotational basis, known collectively as Joint Task Force Ukraine. They generally operate across a number of geographical locations across the country, with its headquarters currently located in Kyiv. Op Unifier has the largest footprint among among NATO countries in Ukraine. In fact, Canada has been one of the main contributors to assist the security forces of Ukraine through capacity and capability building in coordination with other countries providing similar type of assistance. Le contingent actuel est arrivé.
The current contingent arrived in Ukraine last September and is formed mainly of the 5th Mechanized Brigade of Canada based in Valcartier in the Quebec City region. The members of this contingent will be returning home next April and will be replaced by other members from the Valcartier base.
Under Operation Unifier, our trainers have trained over 32,000 soldiers and personnel from the Ukraine security forces to increase their readiness and operational effectiveness. Since last September alone, even through the pandemic, more than 2,700 members of the Ukraine security forces have been trained by our contingent. Through Operation Unifier, the Canadian Armed Forces have delivered more than 700 training courses, working alongside Ukraine's military to develop high specialized skills and capabilities, such as explosive ordnance disposal, military policing, combat medical training, combat engineer training, navigation, and reconnaissance trainings, to name a few. Au cours des années, notre mission.
Over the years, our mission has changed. Initially, this training mission was mainly focused on individual training of members of the Ukrainian security forces. Over the years, we've adjusted and diversified our training according to the needs of the Ukrainian forces.
2020, our Canadian Special Forces joined our efforts under Op Unifier and have been providing training, leadership expertise to Ukraine's special forces. The training has also progressed from individual training to brigade level training. We've also added components to achieve lasting effects by building the institutions such as in the professional development and academic fields. Last week's announcement is a continuation of what we have been doing since 2015. This announcement will allow us to increase the throughput of our training we deliver and will also allow us to plan longer term, at least until March 2025. Tel qu'annoncé la semaine dernière.
As announced last week, an additional contingent of 60 members of the Canadian Forces is added in the short term, and that deployment is now underway. The purpose of this mission was also doubled for a deployment now and up to 400 members of the Canadian Forces. Over the years, we will thus be able to adjust according to the needs of Ukraine. These adjustments are welcomed and will enable us to continue to strengthen the capacity of Ukrainian forces to defend themselves against a range of threats.
We're delivering non-lethal aid. This non-lethal aid will include metal detectors, thermal binoculars, laser rangefinders, medical kits, armor plates, and other protective equipment. Now, on the current security situation regarding Russia massing troops on the borders of Ukraine, in Belarus, and also in Crimea, we are very concerned and we're watching this very closely as the safety of our troops is always our number one priority. We follow the intelligence minute by minute and have regular conversations with our allies to exchange on our views.
Operation Unifier is a training mission and not a combat mission. Our members are far from conflict zones, and we adjust our position according to the needs for training of Ukrainians and the security situation. Although we follow the situation closely in Ukraine and along the borders, we continue our training and we continually plan this training as long as conditions allow.
Is ongoing should mission adjustment be necessary. We cannot disclose the full details of these plans, but we can reassure you that our troops are currently in Western Ukraine and that solid plans are in place should further adjustments be necessary. Let me finish, Mr. Chair, by saying that Operation Unifier has been and continues to be a great mission for the Ukrainians, but also for the Canadian Armed Forces. We have already started our work to implement the government's decision to expand our presence in Ukraine. Despite the current tensions, we will continue to deliver on this important mission, keeping a very close eye on the security situation to ensure our troops are safe at all times. Merci à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for welcoming us here today and to allow me to talk with you, and I'm prepared to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General. Our first round is our 6-minute rounds. And we have first up is Mr. Chong, then Ms. Bandayan, Mr. Bergeron, and Ms. McPherson. So Mr. Chong, you're up, 6-minute round.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Loud and clear. Yeah.
Thank you to the witnesses for appearing in front of us today. It's good to see all of you. There's been a lot of talk that NATO is working together to counter Russia's threats to Ukraine. But I'm wondering how united NATO is, considering reports that Germany, for example, blocked a NATO member, Estonia, from transferring military equipment to Ukraine by refusing to grant permits for German origin weapons that were destined for Kiev. I'm wondering if the witnesses could comment on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I can make a few comments on this, although not on the specifics of the case that has just been cited. What we can say is that NATO solidarity is extremely strong and, in fact, ironclad at this moment. All NATO allies have shared their concern with the situation on the border and its gravity and what it may mean not only for Ukraine, but for the broader region. And they are united in saying publicly that should Russia choose a military path, that NATO is prepared and its individual members are prepared to respond with significant actions. Thank you.
Madame Hewlin, you mentioned that NATO is united. But there seems to be discord in NATO between those members that believe in granting Ukraine's request for lethal defensive weaponry, such as the United Kingdom, the United States, Poland, Latvia, and those members like Canada and Germany, which have not granted that request. Can you explain that difference between NATO members?
Well, what I would say here is that Canada and other NATO members are part of an extremely broad-based effort, a wider effort to support Ukraine in many ways. This is a complex crisis. Complex crises require many things, military support, yes, but also financial support, political support, etc. And what Canada and others, individual NATO allies, bring to the table in their national capacity, whether it's training, whether it's lethal, whether it's non-lethal support, whether it's financial support, is part of this larger picture and part of the effort in demonstrating globally that the alliance is with Ukraine on all fronts. Thank you.
You know, the crisis in Ukraine today really reminds me of parallels to the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s that was a prelude to the Second World War. Democracies at the time blocked military shipments to the Spanish Republic, which was desperately in need of military equipment at the time. And liberally supplied military weaponry to the nationalists, particularly Germany and Italy at the time. And that was the reason for the collapse of the democratically elected Spanish Republic. And I think many democracies subsequently regretted their lack of action in support, lack of provisioning of military weapons for Spanish Republicans during that time, particularly in the aftermath of the 6 years that followed that led to the terrible events of the Second World War. And so, you know, I'm wondering if Canada and Germany and NATO members like that are not committing the same error that was committed in the 1930s. And so, you know, I guess I'll finish by asking this question: are there any circumstances under which Canada would consider transferring lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine, granting her request for this assistance?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Canada is focused right now, as are our NATO allies, on the dual track of dialogue and deterrence. The situation on Ukraine's borders is grave. The risk of armed conflict is real. Further armed conflict is real. And Canada is deeply concerned about Russia's buildup of military forces on Ukraine's border. We call on them to de-escalate tensions and provide transparency with respect to their military activity. Going forward, Mr. Chairman, questions regarding what the government may or may not be prepared to provide going forward, as you will understand, are questions best answered by members of the government. What I can tell you is that Canada continues to consult closely with our allies regarding Ukraine's need, and critically, we continue to talk to Ukraine about Ukraine's needs, and we will be ready to adjust our posture going forward depending on the situation. Thank you.
25 seconds.
I'll just make a quick comment. There seems to be an incongruity between the government's stated policy of not sending lethal defensive weaponry to Ukraine, and at the same time, the minister openly and publicly calling on for Ukraine's ascension to NATO. The essence of the NATO alliance, the heart of the treaty, is that member states are to come to the military aid and defense of a fellow NATO member. And so those two things seem to be incongruous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Next, we have Ms. Bendayan, 6-minute round.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In turn, I would like to thank all our witnesses, but I would like to particularly thank Major General Prévost. And on behalf of all of us here in the committee, I would like to recognize the work being done by our armed forces, a tremendous job. Our armed forces who are throughout the world, including in Ukraine.
All colleagues on Foreign Affairs Committee when I thank the armed forces for their work, and I would like to also do so on behalf of the federal government. I would like in that connection to pick up on something that you said, Major General. You mentioned that our armed forces are not currently in harm's way in Ukraine, or not currently in a conflict area. But of course, as we know, there are risks by being on the ground. What are you seeing on the ground at the moment? And can you elaborate a little bit on the work that our armed forces is doing in the Ukraine right now?
Thank you for the question. So, Mr. Chair, we're obviously, like I mentioned, watching this situation closely. We are, as I mentioned as well, far from the conflict zone right now in eastern Ukraine. Obviously, based on what we observe, we've made some decisions to relocate some of our personnel in western Ukraine. This has been done in consultation with our Ukrainian partners. And I will continue by saying the training continues. Even if we've moved into Western Ukraine, there's much of the training activities that continue. The majority of our training actually continues in Western Ukraine. We'll continue to watch throughout the next weeks, months. Obviously, the security of our troops will remain our main priority, and we'll continue to work with the Ukrainians and our allies, because we're not alone in this in Ukraine. We have the Danes and the Swedens as well as part of our task force unifier. We'll continue to work closely together to make the best decision to protect our troops. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned working in collaboration with our allies who are also on the ground. Is it correct, of course, to say that Canada has the largest presence in the Ukraine at the moment?
It is true. We since 2015, we've had the largest training mission on the ground in Ukraine, but there are many more partners that are working with us over there.
And I understand that we've trained about 32,000 Ukrainian soldiers up to today. Now with our expanded mission, do you have a target or approximate numbers in terms of either in the short or medium term, how many more soldiers our armed forces will be able to train?
We don't at the moment, so we're increasing our capacity. You've heard the announcement that we're sending an additional 60 troops to do this, and the government also allowed us to increase our personnel cap, which was 200 in the past, now to 400. So over the coming weeks and months, we will continue to adjust what we have to offer. Obviously, at certain points, we'll hit to double the capacity, so you'll see the training increase. But also something I've mentioned.
I think we lost you, Major General. If I could go, if you could hear me, Mr. Chair, is there an issue with the witness? Okay.
Yes, I think he's back.
Thank you. Perhaps as a last question, Major General, how do you see the sanctions being used most effectively as a deterrent to further Russian aggression? Do you believe, and any witness may answer this, do you believe that sanctions, including Magnitsky sanctions, could be an effective deterrent to Russian aggression?
Thank you for the question here. I think I'll pass this one to my colleagues at Global Affairs, probably Heidi.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Major General. Yes, sanctions are always an important tool in the toolbox for responding and de-escalating crises and promoting respect for norms and values, including human rights. Canada and our allies are currently looking at the crafting of significant economic measures that could be implemented very quickly should Russia choose a military path.
Are you looking specifically at Magnitsky sanctions?
Magnitsky sanctions and CIMA sanctions have different purposes and different triggers. The Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Actors legislation known as Magnitsky allows us to target individuals for human rights abuses. Our Special Economic Measures Act allows us to target not only individuals, but also states and state institutions for their actions. In this situation, we may very well need a combination of both, but our primary target is the Russian state and its institutions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just checking in on time, do I have time for one more question?
Yeah, you've got about 35 seconds.
Thank you. If somebody could perhaps expand on the type of equipment that we are sending to the Ukraine. I believe the Major General mentioned a few items in his opening. Perhaps he could complete that list for the committee.
I can sure do, Ms. Here, so mainly range finders, thermal, binocular, spotting scopes, which I had not mentioned before, metal detector, body armor, and ballistic armored plates mainly, and some carriage equipment with that as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bendayan. That is your round. Next up, we have Mr. Bergeron for a 6-minute round. Please proceed.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish to thank our witnesses. And, of course, I'd like to thank them for being here with us today and also for making themselves available to parliamentarians in order to inform us. And although I may seem to limit things, I'm really trying to understand. And I'll start with you, Major General, not because you're originally from my electoral district, but because, among other things, in your comments, I noted that you spoke about the quick changing of the tensions between Ukraine and Russia. And Ms. Hulan also emphasized that in answering a question from my colleague, Michael Chong. I would like to go back a little. As a member of the Canada-Ukraine Friendship Committee, we had a presentation in Defense and Global Affairs in April 2021, and at that time, you presented the situation on the ground, which seemed at first glance to be fairly comparable to what had been presented to us a few days ago on January 27th in another briefing session, which this time was organized by Foreign Affairs, which you participated in, Major General. At one point, I raised that, and I asked, what's new since April, so that we can be aware of this situation. There's this syndrome of hysteria or concern for an imminent invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So what is so different? And apart from troop movements along the border and the presence of Russian troops in Belarus, we were quite frankly told we don't really know what's new. So seeing as you're coming back before us today with the fact that there's a quick evolution of changes in these tensions that Russia denies, and even Ukraine denies this alarmist discourse and says it doesn't help them, why do we continue to maintain this alarmist discourse where there doesn't seem to be that much difference in the field compared to the situation that existed last year, unless there are things happening that you haven't told us about? Thank you for the question, Mr. Bergeron.
But probably ask my colleague from Global Affairs to continue. Alors, je vous répondrai en français.
So I'll be answering in French, Mr. Bergeron. So one of the differences, it's true that last year there were tensions, at the very least troop movements along the border of Ukraine and in Crimea. And now those movements last year were much smaller in scale than this year. What also changed, you'll have noted, of course, in the media, there were a lot of troops also being deployed in Belarus, which is a change. And also, you'll see in the information available in the media and publicly that the Russians have begun activities in the Arctic, in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean Sea, and in the Black Sea as well. So all of that is to say that there's a lot more military movement. But before I turn the floor over to my colleague, what we didn't see last year compared to what we do see this year is, of course, the demands made by the Russians publicly, Mr. Putin, and their diplomatic efforts, which we didn't see last year. And I'll now turn over the floor to my colleague from Global Affairs.
I can build on that a little bit. Look, the buildup last spring was serious, and there was a lot of concerted diplomacy, G7, NATO, and European partners. And following that, Russia did eventually de-escalate tensions and pull back the majority of its troops from Ukraine's borders. But the intelligence picture around the current buildup is quite different. During the spring buildup, Russia attempted to justify its presence on the basis of exercises. This time, no justification of any sort has been offered for the positioning of almost a third of Russia's land forces on the border with Ukraine. And as the Major General has just said, the other major change now is that Russia is demanding legally binding security guarantees that would constrain Ukraine's options into the future. This is new, and this is the subject of ongoing diplomacy at this time.
1 minute.
I'll just also say that in addition to demands for legally binding guarantees, which cannot be met by NATO and our allies as they violate our core principles, Russia has also heightened its hybrid aggression, as the Major General has just indicated, its propaganda and its disinformation campaign. All of these things are highly, highly destabilizing, not just to Ukraine, but to the wider region. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would like to thank our witnesses for their answers, which were very illuminating.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Next up is Ms. McPherson, a 6-minute round. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to echo my colleagues when I say thank you very much to all the witnesses for joining us today and providing this information. It is, as my colleague, Mr. Bergeron, just said, very enlightening, very informative. So thank you for taking the time to do this. Of course, what's happening in Ukraine is extremely serious, and we are very deeply worried about that. You know, I come from Alberta. Alberta has an enormous Ukrainian population, and I know many people who are deeply concerned about family members, friends, colleagues that are in Ukraine at this time. It won't be a surprise to anyone on this call that the New Democrats are quite concerned that we put our efforts into things like diplomacy, using things like sanctions, anything we can to de-escalate the situation and prevent the increased aggression of Russia, prevent war, prevent things that would cause loss of lives for civilians, for women and children around Ukraine. So I'm going to ask some questions that are around that, and I hope you'll accommodate me, please. So on January 21st, the Canadian government announced that it was providing a loan of up to $120 million to the government of Ukraine. It is something that President Zelensky had asked for, and it is to quote, to support the country's economic resilience and governance reforms. Now, do you have can you confirm, I guess, for us that none of this loan will be going to the military? And if you can confirm that, how are you going to make sure that that is the case? What mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that? And that can be open to whoever would like to answer it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll just say that Canadian sovereign loans are always subject to negotiation, but I would like to turn to my colleague, Sandra McArdle, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Europe, who has responsibility for this file.
Ms. McArdle, please proceed.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to clarify how the sovereign loan program works. I can assure the chair that the sovereign loan cannot be used for weapons or military purposes. I can also perhaps explain a little bit the process for the loan, which will give some comfort to how we are able to monitor and determine the purposes of the loan. So just to make clear, the sovereign loan program is developed and negotiated with the Ukrainians and must serve either peace and security or poverty reduction goals in line with our feminist international assistance policy. To do that, we will have begun discussions with Ukraine to identify the priority programs that this loan will be appropriate for. Once that is completed, when we have a focus for the loan, Ukraine needs to submit a formal request to us, and then we go through due diligence and ministerial approval. But just to say that this loan is destined for a specific focus. That focus must be in line with FAAE, and the results of that loan are monitored by our development officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to hear that that is going to align with FAAE and hopefully our soon to be released feminist foreign policy. And speaking of our feminist foreign policy, as you will all know, making sure that women are included at all of the tables, including in decision making, including in all of the de-escalation efforts, the diplomatic efforts, is essential and is critical if we are going to have those be successful. What is the government doing to ensure that women peace builders are supported and that Canada's commitment to the feminist foreign policy are reflected in its supports to Ukraine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Attention to the role of women is part of our short and longer term support to Ukraine's military, and it's central to our training effort there. That is why our Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security traveled with the Chief of Defense Staff when he visited Ukraine recently. Both they and our ambassador on the ground in Ukraine emphasize at every stage the strategic, operational, and tactical benefits to the military of considering gender at every stage of their efforts. But if I could just answer the question more broadly, to say that our wider efforts in Ukraine also have FAAE and feminist foreign policy objectives at their very heart. Human rights, women, gender considerations are integral to our training. They're integral to our technical assistance in the area of security sector and judicial reform, including appointments, encouraging appointments. We are supporting women through funding for community and grassroots organizations in Ukraine, although I have to say I don't have with me the name of that program. And we are supporting Ukrainian women to lead at the very highest levels. Finally, I'll just make a final point, if I may, Mr. Chair. Whatever happens in Ukraine, it will end with diplomacy. And whatever agreement is reached, it will need to be monitored. And we know from our experience working with communities around the world that those who monitor must include women and be attentive to gender issues. And I want to assure you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee that Canada will be insisting on this in all of our engagements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lam. That's very reassuring. Mr. Chair, you know what? I will pass it on and I will get it on in my next round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Okay, so we're going to go on to round 2 now. Round 2 is 5-minute rounds for all members except for the Bloc and NDP members, which are 2.5 rounds. First up in round 2 is Mr. Genuis. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to focus my questions on the issue of sanctions. We know that the Putin regime is not focused on the good of Russia as a nation. It's focused on its own well-being. And Vladimir Putin himself is very concerned about amassing wealth at the expense of the Russian people. And we've heard from the Ukrainian community, as well as in particular from Russian dissidents, about how much more of an effect we could have if we were targeting the personal wealth of the regime, if we were specifically sanctioning those individuals who hold Putin's wealth. And Alexei Navalny has published a list of key individuals who are holders of and investors of Putin's personal wealth. And he has shared the fact that he thinks sanctions up till now have not been sufficiently effective because we have not been sufficiently targeting and sanctioning those individuals who are decision makers and holders of the regime's wealth. So I have this list of 8 individuals that Navalny has suggested are key people in terms of holding Putin's wealth and key targets for sanctioning if we are going to really deter aggressive action by the Russian regime. So I want to go through a few of these names. Roman Abramovich is one of the names on that list. He is not sanctioned. Could any of the witnesses share light about Mr. Abramovich, why he has not been sanctioned by Canada, and whether the government is considering sanctioning him?
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Sorry, I'm getting feedback on my... Can you hear me,
yes,
Mr. Chair? Okay.
We can hear you. It's Mr. Genuis, though. That's our Mr.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I cannot speak to that individual case. However, what I want to say is that we are very actively engaged with our like-minded partners to design and implement a robust set of sanctions and that would be quickly deployed should Russia choose a military path, and that those sanctions would represent very serious consequences and incur very serious costs on Russia. Mr. Chair.
Can I just jump in and ask specifically with respect to Navalny's list? And I'll name some of the other names, and maybe you don't want to speak individually about them, but if you could speak to whether this list is part of the discussion and efforts to target Putin's personal wealth. Other names on this list that are not sanctioned are Denis Bortnikov, Igor Shuvalov, Vladimir Solovyev, and Alisher Usmanov. Is this list from Alexei Navalny part of the discussions?
Mr. Chair, we are involved in discussions with our allies about what the shape of a sanctions list could look like. Those conversations are in confidence, and have a deterrent value of their own, which we would wish to preserve at this stage. So I'm unable to give the member further information on the list he's referring to at this time.
Can you help me understand, though, what the deterrent value is if you're not stating that list? I mean, it seems to me intuitively that it would have, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems that it would have more deterrent value if you said, we are prepared to sanction these specific individuals, freeze their assets, or even if, in light of the aggressive action already being taken, the aggressive posturing, you started the process. I mean, after all, these holders of Putin's wealth are accountable for many crimes already committed against Ukraine's sovereignty and against the Russian people. So why not name names and start down the road of sanctioning already to strengthen that deterrent effect?
1 minute.
Thank you. Naming names has the effect of signaling intent. Signaling intent can give an opportunity for money to be moved around, etc. There is greater deterrence in ambiguity at this time. Thank you.
Okay, and just in the time I have left, is the government discussing with allies excluding Russia from the SWIFT international payment system?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All options are on the table in the financial domain and in the sanctions domain. SWIFT has been the subject of discussion in the media, and I can tell you that SWIFT has also come up amongst allies. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do I have time left, or is that?
Well, three seconds, I think. No.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. We'll move on now to Mr. Oliphant, who has a 5-minute round. Mr. Oliphant, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to begin by first thanking the witnesses for your time with us. That's very helpful for us. I also want to thank our analysts for preparing very extensive notes for our study, which I read last night and found very helpful. So to Alison and BJ, thank you for the work that you always do, but this was particularly helpful for me. The one shortcoming, I would say, in the note, and I think I'm going to be asking for a little bit of joint effort between our officials and who are here today and the library analysts, is a little bit more work on the sanctions issue that was just raised by Mr. Genuis. I think he's raising some important points, and I think that some background on our sanctions regimes would be helpful for this committee, because it is often thrown about with a lot of rhetoric, but without a lot of understanding. And maybe we begin, I'd like to give Ms. Hulan a little bit longer time to talk about, again, the difference between the special economic measures, the sanctions which come on, which were amended at the time that Parliament adopted unanimously the Magnitsky measures, and explain the differences between those two regimes and the difficulty, perhaps, I don't want to anticipate the answer, in applying Magnitsky in a preemptive way, because my understanding, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Magnitsky sanctions are on individuals, not states or entities, and are directly related to human rights abuses, as opposed to, say, a military incursion, an illegal operation. So I just, if I could start with Ms. Hulan, and then I may come back with a request for a note from Global Affairs on sanctions, and then some work from the analysts on helping us understand what Global Affairs tells us. Thank you. Ms. Hulan.
Thank you very much. Canada has 3 sanctions regimes. We have the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, which is often referred to as the Magnitsky regime. We have the Special Economic Measures Act, and we have the UN Act. I won't dwell on the UN Act. This is the act under which we are empowered to enact any sanctions that are imposed by the United Nations Security Council, as we are legally obligated to do as a UN member. The difference between the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act and CIMA There's some overlap, but there are real differences. I'll put it this way. The Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act are limited to individuals, and they are related exclusively to human rights and corruption. CIMA can also enable us to level sanctions on individuals and also has a human rights trigger. However, under CIMA, Canada can also sanction a state and can apply some prohibitions at the state level. It can also sanction entities as well as institutions. So states, their institutions, organizations, businesses, large outfits like that. So where the JVC FAAE is limited to individuals, CIMA has a variety of provisions that allow us to target either individuals, entities, or even states. As the member has correctly noted, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act has a human rights trigger and corruption trigger. In CIMA, we also have a international peace and security trigger. So a grave breach of international peace and security that is likely to result in a serious international crisis is grounds under CIMA for
thank you.
initiating.
Well, you could go on for long. I'm going to stop you there because I want to push a little further on this. The Minister of Foreign Affairs recently said that if and part of her deterring activities with respect to this potential crisis is to ensure that Russia is aware that we have not only already sanctioned 440 individuals and entities since 2014, Russian individuals and entities. However, she is prepared and within a half a day would be able to exercise further sanctions as part of a multilateral engagement with others. Is that the best way for us to do sanctions, multilaterally with others and in a coordinated fashion?
It's a very interesting question, Mr. Oliphant, but unfortunately your time is up. I don't know if we can ask for the question to be submitted in writing, or perhaps one of our next witnesses, questioners will circle back to that topic.
I'd be happy, Mr. Chair, if we could get an answer on sanctions in writing from our officials in the future. Thank you.
Is that acceptable, Ms. Hulan?
The answer to the question that has just been posed is yes, but it is also yes, we can provide a written answer in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next round is Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
I'll have to be brief, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to return to the answer that was given by Ms. Hulan once again, for which I thank you once again. The Russians and the Belarusians claim that the Russian presence in Belarus is part of a joint exercise. And first of all, is that an acceptable answer in view of the fact that you stated a few moments ago that last year Russia had justified the presence of its troops as being part of exercises? And the second question I'd like to ask you is, last week on January 27th, when we had our meeting, I asked whether it was possible to share with us the content of the answer to the Russian demands, and I was told that they could not be shared, but those answers were shared with the entire Spanish population through a leak in the newspaper El País. So what does the Spanish population have that we don't to get access to that information that Canadian parliamentarians cannot receive from their government?
Thank you very much. The Belarusian government, I believe, has said that they have invited Russian troops into their country. I would like to fact check that to be certain, but I believe that to be the case. And I'm not aware of comments about exercises. However, I would note that the Russian government has offered no explanation for its troops in Belarus. And that is notable to us. On the documents, I think it's well known that both NATO and the United States have presented papers to the Russian authorities in response to their demands. The papers that you mention have been, including the US paper, has been consulted with Canada in confidence. We are not at liberty to discuss diplomatic actions of other governments that are discussed with us in confidence, but I can speak later to some of the substance of the NATO paper if that is of interest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On that round, Ms. McPherson, you have a 2.5-minute round. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses for all of these responses. Now, I know that some people in this committee and some members of our parliament have been calling on the government to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine. And I have some concerns about, obviously I have concerns about that, but one of the questions I have for you is do you believe that there are risks to providing those lethal weapons to Ukraine, both in terms of keeping track of those weapons, but more importantly, I'd like some information on how Russia would perceive that. Would they perceive that as an escalation instead of a de-escalation? If I could just get some feedback on that, please.
I'd like to turn in a moment to my colleague, Sandra McArdle, on the question of Russian perceptions. However, I can, in fact, I will turn right now to my colleague, Sandra, on that issue. Thank you.
You have the floor, Ms. McArdle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, the approach that we are taking right now is to focus on diplomacy as the primary track. That is the way that the situation is going to be resolved, and it depends very much on us having a strong and unified position with our allies and putting visible to the Russians strong deterrence. I think that is the message that we want to take. Certainly, we want to ensure that we do not take actions that could anyway provoke the situation that we are trying to avoid. Certainly, there is an important role for us in continuing to communicate with our European allies and to ensure that the consensus across Europe with our partners is towards robust support for Ukraine and robust deterrence of Russian aggression. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I do note that the Canadian government has announced that it's creating an action team that's going to be based out of Global Affairs Canada. And I would like some information on who will be involved in that and when they expect it to begin.
Sandra, you have the floor.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to say that there is, in fact, a great deal of action underway in support of Ukraine right now. So the function of that team is already in place. We have close coordination across government with Global Affairs, across a number of divisions of our department, those that you've heard from today that work on sanctions, that work on diplomacy, that work on consular services, mission security, and regional security. But as well, we coordinate on a weekly basis and in other fora more frequently with other departments such as National Defense, Finance, IRCC, and others as required. So just to say, we've mobilized a team here in headquarters to put in place those measures we've discussed: robust diplomacy, robust deterrence.
Ms. McArdle, sorry, I have to move on to our next questioner. Next up is Mr. Abutiev. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening or good afternoon, witnesses. Lieutenant Colonel Luke Frederick Gilbert told CBC News that the Canadian military was forced to relocate about 30% of its 200 trainers in Ukraine to bases west of the Dnieper River because of the threat of Russian invasion. How does that deter Russians from invading? And would not that be more likely to hold off on invading if they knew they would have to face the Canadian troops? The question to Major General Prevost. And if the department with Ms. McCardle would like to weigh on it, would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So we, like I've mentioned in our opening remarks, we are relocating some of our troops based on the security situation on the ground. And we do that with our partners, the Ukrainians, obviously, in discussions with them. There was little activity going out east of the Dnieper River. Most of our training was west of the Dnieper River already. This training will continue, and it will continue until the conditions allow that training to continue. We're more worried about our troops' security at this point. That the mission, the Canadian mission, is a training mission. It's not a combat mission. The only deterrent effect of that mission is the fact that we actually train Ukrainians to better defend themselves and be more professional and effective operationally. That is the deterrent effect of our mission. The reason why we're moving those troops and continue our training will be adjusted in time as the security situation allows. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can the department weigh on this, please?
Thank you. I don't think that I have anything to add to the answer that has just been provided by the Major General.
So the Canadian presence there, although is symbolic with the trainer, that symbolism by itself present an effect by itself to show the Russian that we are more serious than ever to make sure that they don't do anything to invade, at least to increase the chances to do so. So I like to see our further commitment if things escalate further. What will that look like, Major General?
So I would start by saying that it's not only symbolic. The work we've been doing since 2015 has been incredible, training 32,000 troops. These skills that we've provided to the Ukrainian security forces will serve them now and well into the future. So it's not only symbolic, but it is an important contribution that Canada has done. As we've mentioned, this mission is the most important training mission that we have on the ground. In terms of increasing this commitment, the government has already announced last week that we're doubling that mission. We're sending a contingent as we speak of around 60 troops to continue that training output. And we will continue to build the institution in many ways over the years to come. So this is the commitment that the government has done at this time, and it's not symbolic. It is a significant contribution that we've provided since 2015 to this country. Hope this answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, I have extra time, do I?
You have about a minute and a half. Actually.
That's very good. I'll continue to Major General on the question. Do you believe that our troops on the ground are well equipped? What the chances to maybe increase the quality and the quantity if we're not up to the stage where we can defend ourselves beyond the training that we are providing?
Okay, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So our troops are equipped for self-protection. It is a training mission, as we've mentioned. It's always been a training mission. There is no intent to use this mission as a combat mission. We will use the intelligence we have. We're watching, as I mentioned initially, we're watching this minute by minute, and we are positioning our forces to make sure that they stay safe. We're confident we have good contingency in place for the movement of those troops, and we'll continue to adjust to make sure they stay well protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
okay.
Chair.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Boutiev. Next up, we have Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to, again, very clear answers, and I want to congratulate the two presenters or the departments for being very clear, because this is an important issue. I'm not going to ask you what your intentions are, because obviously that'll be giving up your strategic position and your tactics, etc. So I understand that. But I do want to go back to something that Mr. Chong asked about, which I think is very important. We're talking here about allies. I mean, NATO is what, 20 nations? But the OSCE is 57 nations. How much can you depend on the allies in the OSCE, given that we have Central Asia that just is disentangling itself from Russian influence? What about the Minsk process? What's happening there? Because the Minsk process has been going on since Crimea and it has not moved. There has been no assurances from Russia that it will do what it says it will do. And so now Russia is seeking assurances from everybody that we will do what we say we're going to do when you can't trust Russia to do what it says it's going to do. Russia broke assurances with the Budapest assurances on Ukraine and Kazakhstan. So where do you think people like Kazakhstan, like the Central Asian, Germany cannot be discounted, as Mr. Chong said, because we know that Germany is saying what it would do, but Germany is extremely dependent on oil and gas coming from Russia and has been playing that sort of sitting on the fence game. Neither here nor there. So if you decide to move forward with sanctions, will you get the support? I don't want you to name what countries, but do you really believe that you will get the support of everyone? What are we going to do about the Baltic states that are now being particularly at risk right now, especially the NATO ones like Latvia and Lithuania, etc. What is our plan to protect those? And just one last question, and then I'll let you answer. Major General, you talked a little bit about yes, we have troops, and they're not going to be Operation Unifier. Obviously, where are your troops coming from? Are they going to be your NATO troops that you're going to use? And so, and where does Turkey stand in all this? Because it is a NATO member, and Turkey has been playing footsie under the table with Russia. So I just want to know about the strength of the so-called allies we have around the table, especially at the OSCE.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the great honor to serve as Canada's Deputy Ambassador to NATO for 4 years and subsequently in Vienna as ambassador. Obviously, discussions amongst allies where we share a common security vision are always going to be different from tables where, like the OSCE, where we share a room with those who have sometimes quite starkly different visions than we do with respect to basic principles, et cetera, as we are seeing play out in Ukraine and on its borders right now. So I would say that those are expected differences. With respect to sanctions and what it will take to have effective sanctions, we've seen in other parts of the world in the past, and obviously Iran comes to mind, North Korea comes to mind, that the power of sanctions is in shared action, shared particularly, I would say, between those members who sit around the NATO table. That is the bulk of Europe. It's the United States and Canada. And so what I can tell you is that NATO allies have been united in saying there will be severe consequences, including financial consequences for Russia if they choose a military path, even as we hold the option of dialogue open.
Ms. Hulan, excuse me, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Please.
I just want to be very clear. NATO is not only made up of quote unquote Europe. I mean, Turkey is there. What is Turkey's position with regard to Russia? How will Turkey agree with the kinds of things that NATO wants to agree with? Can you depend on Turkey? Seconds. Can you depend on Germany?
NATO allies have been united and steadfast and are speaking with one voice, not only with respect to the importance of dialogue and deterrence, but also with respect to the possibility of major consequences should Russia choose a military option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's 4 minutes, 55 seconds. I think maybe we'll move on, but thank you for your...
Do I have 5 seconds? Can I use it? No, I'm just joking. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We can bank 5 seconds for the next time. How's that? Thank you very much, Dr. Fry. So that is the end of round 2. So we're going to move on to the third round now. We're making very good time today. And first up in the third round is Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Deputy Minister, and if I heard you correctly earlier, you said that the solution will ultimately be diplomatic. We know, all of us know that, the Europe of the 20th century is replete with examples of where diplomacy did not work. And we as a country know well the price that was paid. And the solution in those examples was ultimately and unfortunately a military one. So my question is, how can you be so confident that the solution is ultimately diplomatic? And what analysis has led the government to that conclusion?
I'm not hearing Ms. Hulan.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Even conflicts with a clear military victor end with some form of diplomacy to shape what comes after. And so I would make this as a general point. And with respect to what is going on in Ukraine, what I'd like to say is that NATO, the USA, our colleagues and allies continue to seek ways to de-escalate because we consider the risk of armed conflict to be very real here. And we are conscious that the consequences of and costs of such a conflict would be paid not only in military costs and treasury, but also in human misery that always flows from armed conflict. So our focus right now continues to be on finding diplomatic paths. There are a number of tracks underway. I would say that is a good thing. And we hope that Russia chooses one of them. Thank you.
I'll just finish with a comment on the government's position on the use of, on its decision not to on its decision not to grant Ukraine's request for lethal weapons. It seems to me there's a bit of incongruity. The government has said that it's firmly committed to Ukraine joining NATO. Recently, Minister Joly confirmed that. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says, quote, the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against all of them. And consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them in the exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with the other parties, such actions as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area, end quote. In other words, the government says that it wants to see Ukraine as a NATO member. If Ukraine were a NATO member, such an attack on Ukraine would be deemed an attack on Canada. And if such attack occurs, Canada would assist Ukraine, including the use of armed force. So if the government is so firmly committed to Ukraine's NATO membership, as it's recently confirmed, with all the consequences that that entails, including coming to Ukraine's assistance with armed force, it's confounding why Canada today is not coming to Ukraine's assistance by providing lethal defensive weapons. And I think that is an incongruity in the government's position. On the one hand, it says it wants Ukraine part of NATO. It's firmly committed to that course of action, which entails that Canada will come to Ukraine's defense in the case of an attack on Ukraine by Russia. And on the other hand, it's not willing to provide lethal defensive weapons today to Ukraine. So I think there's an incongruity here in the policy. I think the Americans, the British, have a congruent policy, and it's something that I think the Canadian government needs to address. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chong. Next on our speakers list, we have questioners list. We have Mr. Asasi. Mr. Sassy, you have the floor now for 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and allow me to join my colleagues in thanking the witnesses for appearing before us. It's been very, very helpful. Now, as has been noted, both by the witnesses and by my colleagues, we have been witnessing a lot of robust diplomacy taking place in the past several weeks. This is obviously a situation that is of the utmost importance to Canadians. Now, given the robust diplomacy that's been going on, first of all, I'd like to ask the two witnesses for their assessment. And the question is, if we could start with Ms. Hulan. Is it your opinion that Russia is genuinely interested in dialogue and diplomacy at this point?
Mr. Chairman, we don't know if Russia is serious about diplomacy, but we are. Russia has a choice between meaningful dialogue or risking very severe consequences should they choose military action. That is what our message to Russia. Thank you.
But over the course of the past week, have there been periods where you've found that they are more engaged in those discussions?
Mr. Chair, there are discussions ongoing between Moscow and NATO and Moscow and Washington, and those discussions have not failed. They have not shown a lot of progress to date, but they are ongoing and we are investing in them. Thank you.
Ms. Hulan. Major General, can we have some comments from you as well as to whether, in your professional opinion, Russia is genuinely interested in dialogue at this point?
Mr. Chair, I'll actually side obviously with my colleague from Global Affairs. We don't know. At the same time, we're very hopeful is what I'll add here. Thank you.
My second question is, as we've all been poring over the news, I think the United States is engaged in very public diplomacy on this issue. They have repeatedly stated that there will be massive consequences should Russia illegally invade Ukraine. President Biden is also on record publicly as having said that there will be swift, severe, and united responses. Insofar as our country is concerned, in either through those multilateral fora or more directly on a bilateral level, have we ever indicated to Russian authorities what some of the contemplated measures Canada is willing to take will be?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Canada talks to the Russians at the OSCE. We've been talking to the Russians at NATO, and we've been talking to the Russians in capital through our embassy. My colleague might have something to say about that, but we have been very clear. We are prepared. We are preparing and are prepared to institute significant financial sanctions, including with respect to the financial sector, should Russia choose a military path forward.
The question is, are we, whether it be privately through private channels or publicly, have we been specific as to what the consequences that will flow should Russia invade Ukraine? Or have we specifically indicated what some of those measures have been to the Russian authorities?
Like the United States, which has indicated that the financial measures would be sweeping and significant, we have said to the Russians that, including publicly through our minister, to institute a major package of sanctions and other economic measures should Russia choose a military path forward. Thank you.
30 seconds.
Thick, or we've been ambiguous? That's the only question I have.
As answered earlier, we see value at this stage in not being too specific about what our plans are. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, if I could move to another issue that obviously is of concern to members of this committee. I understand that 440 individuals are subject to sanctions.
Mr. Hassey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your 5 minutes is up.
Thank you.
We have to move on to our next questioner, unfortunately, or fortunately for them. Thank you. Next up is Mr. Bergeron. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We often hear the Minister and Foreign Affairs officials stating that there is unity that is very solid between the allies of the Atlantic Alliance. But what we observe, Mr. Chair, and indeed the Minister was explaining Monday during the exploratory debate that that's the reason why the Prime Minister does not pick up the phone to talk to President Putin, because it appears that is the Normandy format between France and England, that they use for this type of discussion with the Russians. So, building on the question that was asked by our colleague Hedy Fry, I want to understand, according to the media Al Jazeera, that Mr. Erdogan is proposing to act as a mediator, even offering to have peace negotiations taking place in Ankara. Is that not an indication that this facade of unity that is continually being claimed as though to convince themselves is in fact variable in its geometry, because there's not as much enthusiasm among all the Atlantic allies as to the eventual joining of NATO by Ukraine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to underscore this point that NATO's unity is very, very strong. That is not to say that NATO allies bring to their discussions exactly the same perspectives on every issue, nor the same assets to bring to bear on resolving issues that arise. Ideas do get discussed at NATO. Differences of opinion are aired between allies in confidence, but when they move, NATO moves together. Thank you.
Merci, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to know, Chair, how Foreign Affairs sees this meeting announced between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in connection with the Beijing Olympics.
With your permission, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Sandra McArdle, to answer
unfortunately, the round ended about 20 seconds ago, Mr. Bergeron. I think we're going to have some time to get into round 4, though, because we're making pretty good time. So you will have an opportunity still to ask another question. Next up is Ms. McPherson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up. Ms. Hulan, you spoke about severe economic sanctions if Russia did escalate this conflict. Will that consider sanctions on Russian sovereign debt? And I think my colleague, Mr. Genius, had asked this as well, but if you could provide any information on whether the SWIFT international payment system would also be impacted by those sanctions.
The kinds of options that are available for in terms of economic measures include sanctions, individuals, entities, states. They also include various export control measures, import-export bans, et cetera, measures on dealing in foreign currencies of certain types, etc. And it does include things like the SWIFT system, payment system. All of these items remain on the table and are being discussed, although I can tell you that the precise shape of the package that would be instituted is the subject of ongoing discussions, precisely because allies need to move in concert. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you tell me, is there a role for the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program in this current crisis? And if so, what that is?
Thank you very much. The Peace and Stabilization Operations Program continues to operate at this time, and actually the fruits of its work in terms of the Security Sector, reform that it has supported with its emphasis on police and defense sectors is particularly important at this time. The program continues to work on projects related to countering disinformation, very relevant to the current crisis, supporting the Minsk process, very relevant to the current crisis, and peaceful resolution to the crisis generally. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the work of the program focuses on women, peace, and security. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Next up, we have sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. Mr. Genuis, for 5 minutes. You have the floor, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to start by following up on my previous comments, I did not mean to in any way imply that these sanctions against the individuals on Navalny's list would be only preemptive. I think they would be responses to threats to international peace and security and human rights violations that have already occurred. It's precisely why Russian dissidents are calling for these sanctions. And I think if we were applying sanctions aggressively against Putin's allies and those holding his wealth, that would deter future actions by showing that we were serious about past actions. And I also question the sort of this discussion of, the number of people that are saying we sanctioned all of these people. Well, the most important thing with sanctions is that we're targeting the regime's wealth, that we're targeting those powerful actors and creating real consequences for decision makers. And so you can sanction lots of people without necessarily sanctioning the right people. So if I could ask our witnesses, whoever the most appropriate person to respond is, why have we not already sanctioned some of these individuals on Navalny's list, the individuals who are holding Vladimir Putin's personal wealth and investing it abroad?
I can tell you that as a matter of sanctions, I'm not in a position to speak to the specific list that you have before you. What I can tell you is that we have one of the most robust sanctions regimes in the world when it comes to the post-Crimea situation. We have the 440 individuals and entities in response to the illegal annexation of Crimea and associated efforts to undermine Ukraine. We're actively engaged with partners going forward, and the sanctions package that we are prepared to introduce would be robust. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And that's similar to the answers that we've heard before. I wonder if you would be able to provide follow-up information to the committee in writing about the specific individuals that Alexei Navalny has recommended. And it may be that there's certain information that you would not wish to be shared publicly, but if you'd be willing to provide some more detailed information about the discussions around sanctions on an in-camera basis in writing, is that something you'd be prepared to do?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to consult within our ministry to see what is appropriate to be shared with the members of the committee, either in writing or in camera. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you could follow up with the committee either way and just let us know what the results of those discussions are, it would be greatly appreciated. I wanted to follow up on, I think, a very good question from Mr. Bergeron that we didn't have time to hear the answer to with respect to the relationship between the regimes in Russia and China. What is China's position with respect to a possible further invasion of Ukraine? Is there any dialogue going on involving China between the Putin regime and the Chinese regime, between NATO allies and China? Is there any dialogue happening there that you're aware of, and what is their position?
I'd like to turn to my colleague Sandra McCardle for this question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, and I think we've been aware for quite some time that there is a strong and growing relationship between China and Russia, that there is a complicity of authoritarian regimes very much in counterpoint to our own democracies. So certainly we're conscious of the relationship between China and Russia, and it's one of the reasons, of the many reasons, why we are as engaged as we are on Ukraine. There is, of course, Ukraine. There is, of course, the regional implications of this, which are tremendously grave. But there is also a broader strategic question globally that we need to be attentive to. So, in short, we are watching very closely what is happening between Russia and China, and we are conscious that any support China is giving to Russia will be very much counter to the positions of our own unified group of democracies.
And just very quickly, if it's possible, do you see a sense in which Ukraine could provide a precedent for Taiwan, or that there's a potential linkage in how those situations could play out?
I think we're very attentive to the geostrategic implications of what's happening in Ukraine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Genuis. Mr. Sarai, you are up, and you have the floor for 5 minutes.
First of all, I want to thank and echo my colleagues' sentiments towards all the panelists. You guys have great depth in this and have provided great insight. I might switch gears a little bit to a little different perspective of asking questions. I want to know, what is Ukraine's own military capacity and level of preparedness to face a Russian aggressor? Are they prepared, and what's their military size and capacity? If somebody can enlighten me, maybe Major General can do that.
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll answer broadly. Obviously, in terms of capacity, Ukraine is much smaller than Russia. In terms of capability, they're better. They've been getting better a long time. They're obviously watching this space carefully. I cannot provide an assessment, a comparative between the two, but in pure size, there's obviously a big difference in terms of capability also. That's all I can provide as an answer for this time. Thank you very much.
They want weapons, but they don't. They can fight themselves. That's why I wanted to know if their ability to defend themselves is strong, or And I am not asking for anything that's confidential in that regards. But that's what I was getting at. I also want to know how many U.S. soldiers or reinforcements are in the region. Is there a strong presence along with other NATO forces in that region that can come to Ukraine's defense if need be?
So maybe I can answer that question, Mr. Chair. So the U.S. has a presence. They have a training mission also in Ukraine, and they follow the similar approaches we're taking. They're going to continue to train with the Ukrainians, and they're following the situation as well in terms of positioning their forces accordingly. In terms of, there was an announcement yesterday and in the last week as well, and how the U.S. is, it's public. It was a news release on how they are reinforcing the eastern flank of NATO, not necessarily to fight in Ukraine, but at least reinforcing their positions in Romania and Poland, as was announced yesterday from the Pentagon.
Interesting question, and there may be an answer or not. What has Russia officially stated as their reason for having 100,000 troops at the Ukrainian border?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's interesting is that Russia has not stated why they have 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. The Russian position is that their troop movements inside their own country are their own business. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can ask another question. I want to ask, how is
another minute and a half, actually,
perfect.
So you're good.
Ms. Ulan, how has the Canadian government assessed the impact to date on the sanctions related to Russia? And if so, what did that assessment determine?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, I can hear you. There is some feedback somewhere, though. Maybe a microphone is open.
It's perhaps.
Please give it a try.
Okay, I'll try again. That's better. Thank you. Look, our assessment is that sanctions, post-Crimea sanctions, have had a big impact. I would like to turn to my colleague Sandra McCardle for additional texture that she would like. This is measured in Russia's efforts to have those sanctions lifted in recent years. And our assessment is that sanctions are always best when they are pursued jointly amongst countries with economies that have the ability to make an impact. Sandra, I don't know if you'd like to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly just to add that I think that our action in concert with our allies, and that has been the United States, the UK, the European Union, on putting sanctions in place in Russia, has been a very strong message from the international community that Russia's actions are unacceptable in Crimea, they're unacceptable with respect to Mr. Navalny, and they're unacceptable with respect to Donbass as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we're up to round 5. What I'd like to do is have 6 2.5-minute rounds. That'll take us to 5:25 roughly, and then we have a small bit of committee business to conclude after we let our witnesses go. So if that's okay with everyone, I'd like to proceed on that basis. First up, Mr. Genuis, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, the question is mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking. My eyes were on the.
I yield my time to Mr. Abeltaif.
Sorry, Mr. Abatief, my apologies. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. My apologies.
That's okay. I'll make it easy. I'll stay on the sanctions. Since the illegal annexation of Crimea, Canada sanctioned more than 440 individuals and entities, imposing asset freezes, other prohibitions. And since that, after 8 years, and after the European and the Americans or US sanctions, Russia's now may feel that they're sanction-proof. For example, their central bank reserve, which is what we call the rainy day fund, reached all-time high by 2020 and 2021 to $630 billion. And their also national wealth fund was worth about $180 billion by the end of that year. So what reason do we have to believe that sanctions would produce more shrug from Russian authorities? How can we believe that sanctions is going to be effectively applied?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, there is no doubt that Russia is in a stronger financial position than it would have been a couple of decades ago for the reasons that have been indicated. Sanctions can still bite, though. We live in a globalized world, and a country like Russia needs to trade. I would say that we are very actively engaged with our partners to make sure that sanctions would be, and other economic measures would be coordinated and would be painful. And even a country with the ability to withstand significant sanctions cannot withstand significant sanctions indefinitely.
So sanctions bites, but can sanctions stop invasion?
We are focused on the dual track of diplomacy, dialogue, and deterrence. The threat of sanctions, the credible threat of sanctions, well organized in advance amongst significant economies, forms a significant part of that deterrence package.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abutiev. Ms. Bendayan, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hulan, you mentioned earlier in your testimony the widespread Russian disinformation and Russian propaganda. Unfortunately, that propaganda is leaking into Canada as well. I have even seen it on the social media of some of our opposition colleagues. My question to you, Ms. Hulan, is what are we seeing as the main vehicles of Russian disinformation in Ukraine, but also outside the Ukraine? And perhaps I could invite you, given that the chair has given me only 2.5 minutes, would you like to provide that answer in writing, Ms. Hulan?
I'd like to invite Sandra McArdle to give a first response, and if necessary, we can follow up in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, Russia's campaign of disinformation propaganda is well known, well developed. We've certainly seen it active in Ukraine, and we've seen it active in neighboring countries. It's something that, as you'll note from the announcement of just a few days ago, Canada intends to support Ukraine on cybersecurity and cyber operations, and I think that will be a very effective way for helping us to address in this very vulnerable country Russia's campaign to destabilize.
Merci. Et je poserai une...
Thank you, and I'd ask a second question if I have time. My friendly colleague, Mr. Béchon, earlier in the meeting seemed to be underplaying the Russian threat toward Ukraine by stating that the Ukrainian government itself was stating that it didn't think an invasion was imminent.
This is, from the lay perspective, obviously, if Ukraine were to announce that an invasion was imminent in their view, that would cause widespread panic. In your expert view, what would be the impacts on the Ukrainian economy and in particular their financial system should the Ukrainian government announce to its population that an invasion were imminent?
Thank you. I'll turn to my colleague, Sandra McArdle, to respond to that. But just to note that when she, I'll turn to my colleague, Sandra McArdle, to respond.
Mr. Chair, look, I think as my colleague was about to say, look, even when Minister Joly visited Ukraine, even the threat of instability was already having a significant impact on the economy. Obviously, an invasion will have all kinds of grave consequences for Ukraine. That's in part why we've already announced an offer of a sovereign loan to Ukraine of $120 million to help shore up Ukraine, and as well amongst the allies with whom we've mentioned, I think there's a great concern and understanding of the importance of providing Ukraine with economic support during a difficult time. We'll continue to have those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Bergeron. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais dire à ma collègue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to say to my colleague, Ms. Bendayan, the fact that Canada, UK, and US are crying wolf right now has exactly the same effect on the Ukrainian economy, and that's probably one of the reasons why Ukraine is asking us to calm things down a bit and take a calmer approach in our discourse in order to avoid this kind of overloading that has a substantial impact on the Ukrainians, just as is the case of the decision to withdraw staff, non-essential staff from the embassy. Only a very limited number of countries, the US and the UK, once again, and Australia and Canada have done that, but other allies are staying present to show by their presence to demonstrate their support of Ukraine. So I would like to return to the question raised by my colleague Michael Chong on Ukraine joining NATO. When the minister went to Kiev, the minister said that, of course, we remain favorable to that, but that we would need some additional improvements in terms of democracy. I would like to be informed about that because the expectations seem to be different depending on which country in the Atlantic Alliance is involved. As to Ukraine seems to have the impression that we're simply indefinitely delaying the timeline, and the Ukrainian Prime Minister also showed certain impatience in that regard. So do we really intend to admit Ukraine, or is it simply something that should be indefinitely delayed to avoid having to deal with the Russian threat?
Mr. Chair, I know time is tight, so I want to be extremely clear. Canada strongly supports Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. In order to become a member of NATO, you need to meet certain standards set forth by NATO. And Ukraine has been working along that path. They have sought our assistance and cooperation in doing so, and it has been our pleasure to be involved with them. That is the purpose of much of our engagement in that country. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. McPherson, 2.5 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, this will be my last intervention today. So I do want to focus a little bit on the Canadians that are in Ukraine at the moment. And I'd like to know what is being done to ensure the safety of Canadian citizens in Ukraine, in particular, if the situation changes. So if the situation on the ground changes quite rapidly, what are the things that have been put in place to make sure that the citizens, Canadian citizens in Ukraine, are safe?
Thank you. My colleague Julie Sunday will answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we recently elevated our global travel advisory to the highest level to inform Canadians to avoid all travel to Ukraine. We are urging Canadians to leave due to ongoing Russian threats and the risk of armed conflict. A really critical element of our planning is having them depart while commercial options are still available. So at the moment, there are numerous commercial flight options and also numerous road and rail departure options. That said, if conditions were to deteriorate rapidly, we are also looking at possible assisted departure options where the primary route out of Ukraine would be to Poland. So we are undertaking significant work with our embassy in Warsaw to ensure there will be support for Canadians at border checkpoints and to facilitate onward travel. So we're very focused on ensuring Canadians are able to depart safely from Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. And knowing that we have already some of our embassy people in the embassy have left, and knowing that they've already had to leave Ukraine, has that impacted our ability to notice things on the ground? And also, has that been what has the impact been on Ukraine? How did they feel about that withdrawal, I guess?
Mr. Chair, so the honourable member is correct. In January, we did approve departure of diplomatic dependents and non-essential employees. That said, we have also added some consular security and emergency operations staff to the mission to be able to bolster our capacity to provide services to Canadians in those key areas. And our mission in Kiev is fully open and operational and providing all of that consular support right now.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have very short time. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Mr. Trong, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to focus on what hard power tools we have to counter Russia's threats to Eastern Europe. We've talked about lethal defensive weapons for Ukraine. I'd like to talk about energy. Russia's military is not the only tool of how hard power it has to intimidate Europe and Ukraine. It can cut off natural gas supplies to Europe. Russia supplies 40% of Europe's gas. In the last week, there's been numerous reports that the Biden administration has been talking to numerous countries in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia about stepping up natural gas production to Europe in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Some of these reports have indicated that the government, the Biden administration has been talking to countries like Norway and Qatar, for example. Canada has not been mentioned in these reports. My question is this: is the government part of any discussions with the Biden administration about providing additional natural gas in the event Russia cuts supplies to Europe?
Sandra McArdle.
Mr. Chair, look, the question of energy is an extremely important one as we look at putting in place measures that will bite into Russia. Clearly, there are measures which will affect Russia. We'll also have an important bounce back on our allies in Europe. This issue was raised when Minister Joly was in Brussels and in Paris, so certainly aware of the situation and very sensitive to the impact on Russia, on Europeans, particularly in winter. We have discussed this with the United States, and I do know that Natural Resources Canada has been looking into Canada's position in this area. I can't provide a detailed answer, but I can say that our export capacity in LNG is quite limited, and a first survey of the resources indicates that much being winter, much of the capacity is already for liquefaction is already at its top level. So there certainly will need to be international coordination if we come to the point that that kind of support is required. Thank you.
Thank you
it's
very
interesting.
much. Sorry, Mr. Chong. It's
okay.
2.5 minutes goes by real fast. I'm sorry.
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Oliphant, you have the last round of the day. 2.5 minutes. The floor is
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to begin by thanking the officials. There's no secret that at times I've been disappointed by officials coming before committee, and I think today I have been absolutely impressed with all of your work. So thank you at your transparency, your willingness to engage, and your openness to help us as a committee understand what's going on. In my head, I have a bunch of Ds, words beginning with Ds in terms of diplomacy and dialogue and deterrence. I want to close on defense, which is not my area. I wanted to give Major General Provo just a little chance to talk about the fact that this is not a symbolic activity that we're engaged in. This is a very real activity, the extension of Unifier, as well as a little bit on Operation Reassurance, which is a tandem operation in the region, ensuring stability. And so that, I mean, Canadians are watching our maybe 5, but a few Canadians are watching our hearing today, and I want you to have the chance to talk about the importance of the military work that we are engaging in. A lot of people are focused on hardware, in fact, fixated on it. I think I'm focused on training, on engagement, on the frigate that we have with NATO, and on Reassurance and Unifier. If you could close us with a little bit of an explanation of why this is important work we're doing.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I thank the member for the question. So we've talked a lot about what we do under Unifier, a very important contribution that Canada does, and I thank the members in the committee to invite us today to talk about it. We're proud of the work they do, and hopefully it'll help the committee and Canadians understand this. This has been a mission that's been ongoing for 7 years of training over 30,000 troops in Ukraine, and that training will last. And we're moving now into institutional building with Ukraine as well to have lasting effects. Gender perspective is part of this, education is part of this, democratic institutions is part of this. So that's the important work that we do in Unifier in Ukraine. And I thank the member as well to introduce Reassurance, which is the mission we do in NATO to reinforce the eastern flank of NATO. Right now, Canada is the lead in Latvia on a very important multinational brigade called EFP Latvia. Canada is the lead of 9 nations, a very multinational brigade there as deterrent along and reassurance in Latvia. We also have the frigate that the members talked about right now. HMCS Montreal is sailing across the Atlantic to be part of standing NATO Maritime Group 2. And we also have periodically F-18s that provide air policing in Romania.
We're quite a ways beyond the 2.5 minutes, but that brings our questioning to an end for this afternoon. I want to thank our witnesses very, very much. It's been a very interesting and informative afternoon. I want to thank you for the information you've provided. And I know it's a very sensitive situation, and you've done your best to inform the committee and all those who are watching as best that you can. So we can't thank you enough as a committee for that.
Mr. Chair, just point of order quickly.
Sure.
I just wonder if there were some requests for documents around sanctions, and I think maybe other issues in follow-up. Are you, Mr. Chair, going to be able to follow up with the witnesses and report back to the committee? Do you have a sense of maybe the time frame that would be realistic for that? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just defer to the clerk for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we can do that.
Thank you very much. And if there are no other points of order, then I will release our witnesses. Thank you very much for being here and the information you provided today. Have a great day. I'd like the committee members to stay, though, as we do have a small bit of committee business to complete before the meeting wraps up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just point of order, I guess I don't know what the proper. I just want to let you know a couple members here do have flights to catch, so if we can be as efficient on this in the next couple of minutes. Thank you.
Well, I'm one of those members, so I agree with you. Thank you for that.
Mr. Chair, I move the adoption of all the proposed budgets that have been sent to us.
All in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Okay, everyone have a great weekend. Take care. Good meeting.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.